The scream that tore through Pine Ridge at 11:47 p.m. on June 14, 1998, wasn't the sound of someone finding a body. It was the sound of someone finding a message. Because when railroad worker Dennis Wright stumbled upon 19-year-old Maya Ellison near the abandoned switching station, her hands weren't just still, they were positioned, folded across her chest like a burial, her eyes closed as if she'd been put to sleep, and carved into the dirt beside her head, barely visible in his flashlight beam, were 3 letters that would haunt Atlanta for 26 years. PC. This is the story the police never wanted you to hear. The case that went so cold, evidence literally vanished into thin air. And if you think you know how this ends, I promise you, you don't. Before we go further, if stories like this matter to you, if real justice and real truth deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the algorithm only shows these stories to people who prove they care. One click tells the platform that cold cases matter, that forgotten victims deserve voices. Don't just watch, participate. Comment where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear Maya's name. Because what happened next proves that some secrets don't stay buried forever. The South Side neighborhood of Pine Ridge had always been the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' business, sometimes too well. Church on Sundays, block parties in summer, kids riding bikes until streetlights buzzed on. But the night Maya disappeared, something shifted in the air itself. Residents would later describe it as a thickness, like humidity you could taste. The kind of feeling that makes you lock your doors without knowing why. Maya Ellison wasn't supposed to be walking home alone that night. The rising sophomore at Spelman College, home for summer break, had stayed late at Greater Hope Baptist for choir rehearsal. Her mother, Lorraine, had planned to pick her up at 10:30 p.m., but Maya called at 10:15, voice bright with that particular confidence of young women who've never known real danger. "Mama, I'm getting a ride with someone from church. Don't worry about me." Those were the last words Lorraine would ever hear her daughter speak. When Maya didn't answer her phone at midnight, Lorraine called the church. Empty. She called Maya's friends. Nothing. By 1 a.m., she was at the police station, and by 2 a.m., every parent in Pine Ridge was awake, checking on their own children, whispering prayers into dark bedrooms. Dennis Wright found her 3 hours later during his routine track inspection. But here's what the initial police reports never mentioned, what the newspapers carefully omitted, what the community was told to forget. Maya's shoes were placed neatly beside her body, not kicked off, not torn away, placed. Her necklace, a small gold cross her grandmother gave her, was missing, but her purse sat untouched 5 feet away, wallet and cash still inside. This wasn't robbery. This wasn't random violence. This was theater. The FBI arrived within 18 hours. Lead investigator Jordan Hale, 32 years old and hungry to prove himself, immediately recognized what local police had missed. Beneath Maya's fingernails, skin cells. On her torn blouse, blood spatter. And most critically, on the ground near her body, a small pool of blood that didn't match Maya's type. Someone else had bled at that scene, someone who'd left part of themselves behind. The blood sample was collected, labeled, catalogued. Evidence tag M98061407B. It went to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in a sealed container, accompanied by a chain of custody forms signed by 3 different officials. Standard procedure, airtight documentation. And then, 6 weeks later, it was gone. Not misplaced, not mislabeled, gone. The evidence locker showed no signs of tampering. The logbook had no gaps. But when prosecutors prepared to move forward with DNA testing, technology still relatively new in 1998, the sample had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. And with it went the only physical link to Maya's killer. The FBI investigation hit a wall so solid it might as well have been made of concrete. Without DNA, they had nothing. Dozens of interviews led nowhere. Hundreds of hours of surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed nothing useful. The community paralyzed by fear and grief, began turning inward. Neighbors stopped talking to neighbors. Suspicion poisoned every conversation. Who had access to that evidence room? Who stood to benefit from the sample disappearing? But here's what nobody understood then, what wouldn't become clear for 26 years. The blood sample didn't vanish by accident. It vanished because someone knew exactly what it would reveal. Someone with enough power, enough access, enough respect that nobody would dare question them. Someone who stood in Maya's funeral and wept at her graveside. Someone who led prayer vigils and organized search parties. Someone who looked Maya Ellison in the eyes and promised that God would bring justice. The monster wasn't hiding in shadows. The monster was hiding in plain sight, wrapped in authority and trust. And the reason Maya died wasn't what anyone suspected. It was something so dark, so twisted, that when the truth finally emerged decades later, it would shatter everything Atlanta thought it knew about evil. Because those 3 letters, scratched in the dirt, PC, weren't a signature. They were a warning Maya tried to leave behind with her last conscious moments. A warning that died with her that night, until one dusty box proved that some truths refused to stay buried. 26 years is long enough for a city to forget how to be afraid. Long enough for railroad tracks to rust, for abandoned buildings to become landmarks instead of crime scenes, for a name like Maya Ellison to fade from daily conversation into occasional remembrance. But some cases don't fade, they metastasize. They grow roots in the minds of the people who couldn't solve them, wrapping around memories like kudzu until every quiet moment becomes haunted. Jordan Hale understood this better than most. Now 58 was silver threading through his dark hair and reading glasses he refused to admit he needed. Jordan had traded his FBI badge for a professor's lectern at Emory University. He taught criminal psychology to eager students who'd grown up watching true crime documentaries, who thought they understood darkness because they'd binged podcast series about serial killers. They had no idea. They hadn't stood in that rail yard in 1998, hadn't watched a mother collapse. When dental records confirmed her worst nightmare, hadn't felt the particular shame of a case going cold in your hands like water through cupped fingers. Maya's file lived in a cardboard box in Jordan's home office. He'd never returned it. Technically theft of federal property. Practically speaking, nobody had asked for it back. Sometimes he'd wake at 3 a.m. from dreams that weren't quite nightmares, just Maya's face, young and hopeful, asking him a question he could never quite hear. On those nights, he'd sit with the file, reading witness statements he'd memorized years ago, searching for the detail he'd missed, the connection that would make everything click into place. His wife had left him in 2003. "You're married to ghosts," she'd said. She wasn't wrong. If this story is keeping you up at night the way it kept Jordan up, if you're already wondering how this possibly resolves, then do yourself a favor and subscribe right now, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about justice. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had something from your past you couldn't let go? Share this video with someone who needs to understand that some truths are worth waiting for. The algorithm only promotes content that people engage with, so your click literally determines whether stories like Maya's get told or get buried again. The monster wasn't hiding in shadows. The monster was hiding in plain sight, wrapped in authority and trust. And the reason Maya died wasn't what anyone suspected. It was something so dark, so twisted, that when the truth finally emerged decades later, it would shatter everything Atlanta thought it knew about evil. Because those 3 letters, scratched in the dirt, PC, weren't a signature. They were a warning Maya tried to leave behind with her last conscious moments. A warning that died with her that night, until one dusty box proved that some truths refused to stay buried. Chapter 2. 26 years is long enough for a city to forget how to be afraid. Long enough for railroad tracks to rust, for abandoned buildings to become landmarks instead of crime scenes, for a name like Maya Ellison to fade from daily conversation into occasional remembrance. But some cases don't fade, they metastasize. They grow roots in the minds of the people who couldn't solve them, wrapping around memories like kudzu until every quiet moment becomes haunted. Jordan Hale understood this better than most. Now 58 was silver threading through his dark hair and reading, glasses he refused to admit he needed. Jordan had traded his FBI badge for a professor's lectern at Emory University. He taught criminal psychology to eager students who'd grown up watching true crime documentaries, who thought they understood darkness because they'd binged podcast series about serial killers. They had no idea. They hadn't stood in that rail yard in 1998, hadn't watched a mother collapse. When dental records confirmed her worst nightmare, hadn't felt the particular shame of a case going cold in your hands like water through cupped fingers. Maya's file lived in a cardboard box in Jordan's home office. He'd never returned it. Technically theft of federal property. Practically speaking, nobody had asked for it back. Sometimes he'd wake at 3 a.m. from dreams that weren't quite nightmares, just Maya's face, young and hopeful, asking him a question he could never quite hear. On those nights, he'd sit with the file, reading witness statements he'd memorized years ago, searching for the detail he'd missed, the connection that would make everything click into place. His wife had left him in 2003. "You're married to ghosts," she'd said. She wasn't wrong. If this story is keeping you up at night the way it kept Jordan up, if you're already wondering how this possibly resolves, then do yourself a favor and subscribe right now, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about justice. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had something from your past you couldn't let go? Share this video with someone who needs to understand that some truths are worth waiting for. The algorithm only promotes content that people engage with, so your click literally determines whether stories like Maya's get told or get buried again. Carly didn't call her supervisor. She called Jordan Hale directly. She'd read his name in every article about the case, knew he'd transferred to teaching, found his university email in 30 seconds of searching. Her message was 4 sentences. "Professor Hale, I found the blood sample from Maya Ellison's case. It's been hidden for 26 years. We need to talk." Jordan was in the middle of lecturing about cognitive biases in criminal investigations when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. He always kept his phone on silent during class. But something made him glance at the preview notification. He read the first line of Carly's email. The dry erase marker fell from his hand. Students looked up confused, as their normally composed professor stood frozen, face drained of color, staring at his phone like it had just delivered news of a death, or in this case, news of a resurrection. "Class dismissed," Jordan said quietly. Then louder, almost shouting, "Class dismissed!" He was already running for the parking lot, already calling the GBI, already feeling his heart pound with something he hadn't felt in over 2 decades. Not hope exactly, but something close. The feeling that maybe finally Maya Ellison could tell them who killed her. He had no idea that the answer would be so much worse than anyone imagined. The DNA lab at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, a combination that Jordan had once found comforting, back when he still believed science could solve anything. Now standing in the observation room with Carly Rhodes beside him, watching technicians process the sample that had been hidden for 26 years, he felt something closer to dread. Because sometimes the answers you spend decades searching for are the ones that destroy everything you thought you understood about a case. The lead technician, Dr. Sarah Chen, had initially refused to process the sample. Chain of custody was broken. Documentation was incomplete. Any half-decent defense attorney would shred it in court. But Jordan had made the argument that changed her mind. "We're not looking to prosecute a ghost. We're looking to identify one. Give Maya's family a name, even if we can never get a conviction." Dr. Chen had sighed, adjusted her safety goggles, and gotten to work. Now 72 hours later, she emerged from the lab with a manila folder and an expression Jordan couldn't read. Not triumphant, not confused, something darker. "You need to sit down for this," she said. Jordan remained standing. "Just tell me." The DNA is intact, remarkably well preserved, actually. Whoever sealed it knew what they were doing. We got a full profile, she paused. And in that pause, Jordan felt the weight of 26 years pressing against his chest. But here's the problem. The blood doesn't belong to Maya Ellison. It's male DNA, which matches what you suspected. It's from her attacker. And, Jordan's voice came out hoarse, and we ran it through CODIS, through every criminal database we have access to. No matches. So I expanded the search to genealogical databases, public records, everything I could legally access. Dr. Chen opened the folder, but didn't hand it over yet. Jordan, this is where it gets complicated. The DNA matches someone who was never a suspect in your investigation. Someone who, according to everything you documented, was actually helping you search for Maya's killer. The room tilted slightly. Who? Pastor Eugene Coleman? Before we go further, and trust me, you need to hear what comes next. Take a second to process what we just learned. The man who led prayer vigils, who organized search parties, who comforted Maya's mother. If you're feeling that sick twist in your stomach right now, that's exactly what Jordan felt. And if this story is proving that monsters hide in the most trusted places, subscribe and share it. Drop a comment. Did you see this coming? Because I guarantee you're not ready for what the DNA reveals next. Your engagement keeps these buried truths alive. Jordan's legs finally gave out. He sat down hard on the observation room's metal bench. Pastor Eugene Coleman had been one of the first people Jordan interviewed in 1998, a pillar of the Pine Ridge community. Maya's own pastor, a man whose grief had seemed profound and genuine. He'd spent hours with Jordan, reviewing everyone Maya knew, everyone who attended Greater Hope Baptist, offering insights about the neighborhood, about Maya's character, about the kind of person who might do something so evil. He'd looked Jordan in the eyes and lied with the fluency of someone who'd been lying his entire life. He's dead, Jordan said flatly. Coleman died in 2010, heart attack during a sermon. I know. I pulled the death certificate. Dr. Chen finally handed over the folder, which means we'll never prosecute him. But at least now you know. Wait! Carly, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. You said the DNA matches Pastor Coleman. Not that it is Pastor Coleman. What's the difference? Dr. Chen glanced at her, then back at Jordan. Smart intern you've got here. The difference is significant. The DNA is a familial match to Eugene Coleman. Same Y chromosome, same paternal lineage. But the specific markers don't align perfectly with Coleman's medical records. Jordan's mind, trained by decades of investigation, started connecting dots at a speed that made his head throb. You're saying someone related to Coleman left that blood, someone who shares his DNA but isn't him. Exactly. And there's only one person in Coleman's immediate family who fits that profile. Dr. Chen pulled out another document. Eugene Coleman had one child, adopted at age 7 in 1983, legal name Michael Coleman. The name hit Jordan like a physical blow. He remembered Michael, quiet, awkward, standing behind his father during interviews, barely speaking. In 1998, Michael would have been 22 years old enough, strong enough, and positioned perfectly to know Maya's schedule, to be trusted by her, to get close without raising alarm. Where is Michael Coleman now? That's what I was hoping you could tell me, Dr. Chen said, because this is where it gets stranger. Michael Coleman has no criminal record. He's actually a youth counselor at a community center in East Atlanta. Well respected, volunteers with at-risk kids. By all public accounts, he spent his adult life trying to help the kind of young people She paused, choosing her words carefully. His father pretended to care about. Jordan was already on his feet, already pulling out his phone to call the FBI field office, but Carly's voice stopped him. Professor Hale, look at this. She was holding another page from Dr. Chen's folder, one Jordan hadn't reached yet. There's a note here about anomalies in the sample. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. That's the other thing. The blood sample contains trace DNA from 2 sources. The primary profile matches Michael Coleman's familial line, but there's a secondary contributor, much smaller quantity, but definitely present, another male. and this one doesn't match anyone in any database. The room went completely silent, except for the hum of laboratory equipment through the walls. "You're telling me," Jordan said slowly, "that two people's blood got mixed at that crime scene, Michael Coleman and someone else." "Not just someone else," Dr. Chen corrected. "Someone related to Michael. The secondary DNA shares genetic markers with both Michael and Eugene Coleman, which should be impossible because Eugene only had one child." But Jordan's blood had turned to ice water because he suddenly remembered something from his original investigation. Something Eugene Coleman had mentioned casually, dismissively, during their third interview. A brother. Eugene Coleman had a younger brother, estranged for years, a man nobody had thought to investigate because he hadn't been in Atlanta in decades. "What was the brother's name?" Carly asked, reading Jordan's expression. Jordan's voice came out as barely a whisper. Elias Coleman. And somewhere in America, a monster who'd been free for 26 years had no idea his DNA had just started speaking from the grave. The interrogation room at the FBI's Atlanta field office hadn't changed much since Jordan's days as an active agent. Same industrial gray walls, same bolted-down table, same mirror that fooled nobody. But sitting across from Michael Coleman, Jordan felt like he'd stepped into a different kind of room entirely, one where the temperature kept dropping, where every word carried weight that could crush bones, where truth and lies wore each other's faces. Michael Coleman looked nothing like the awkward 22-year-old, Jordan remembered. At 48, he'd grown into himself, tall, solid build, close-cropped hair showing gray at the temples. He wore a simple polo shirt with his community center's logo, a pair of hands catching a falling child. His expression was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes from years of practice, from learning to keep your face neutral when people ask dangerous questions. "Thank you for coming in voluntarily," Jordan began, though they both knew there was nothing voluntary about it. When the FBI calls about a 26-year-old murder case with fresh DNA evidence, you come, or you look guilty. "Of course." Michael's voice was soft, controlled. "Anything I can do to help find who killed Maya. She meant a lot to our church community." Jordan slid a photograph across the table. Maya's senior portrait from Spellman. That bright smile, those hopeful eyes. Michael's gaze dropped to it, and for just a fraction of a second, something cracked in his composure. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his left eye. "Tell me about your alibi for the night of June 14th, 1998, Jordan said. "I gave a statement back then. I was at home with my father. We had dinner, watched television, went to bed around 11. Your father confirmed that alibi." "Yes." Michael's hands rested flat on the table, perfectly still. "Here's my problem, Michael. We've been reviewing the original case files. Your father said you were home all evening, but a neighbor, Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, lived 3 doors down, told officers she saw you leaving the house around 9:45 p.m. in a hurry, carrying something she couldn't identify. This is the moment in every investigation where you see who someone really is, where the mask either holds or shatters. Watch how Michael responds. And if you're watching this wondering whether you could spot a liar this skilled, hit that subscribe button, because we're about to go deeper into the psychology of deception than most true crime channels ever dare. Comment below. Have you ever caught someone in a lie that changed everything? Share this with someone who thinks they can always tell when people are lying. Because what happens next proves that sometimes the truth is more complicated than guilt or innocence. Michael's perfectly still hands began to tremble, just slightly, just enough. "Mrs. Hendricks was mistaken," he said, but his voice had lost its steadiness. Jordan leaned forward. "DNA doesn't make mistakes, Michael. We found the blood sample, the one that disappeared 26 years ago. It matches your family's genetic profile." "That's impossible." "That evidence was lost. It was hidden." "There's a difference." Jordan let that sink in. "Someone with access to the crime lab took that sample and buried it where nobody would find it. Someone who knew what it would reveal. Someone who needed it to disappear." Michael's breathing had changed, shallow and quick. His eyes darted to the mirror, to the door, to Maya's photograph, anywhere but Jordan's face. "I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest. You can leave any time." Jordan kept his tone neutral, but he pulled out another photograph. This one showed a man in his 60s, weathered face, cold eyes. "Before you go, tell me about your uncle, Elias Coleman." The reaction was immediate and visceral. Michael's hands flew off the table like he'd been electrocuted. His chair scraped backward. His face, so carefully controlled moments before, twisted into something between terror and rage. "I haven't seen Elias in 26 years, Michael said, and for the first time Jordan heard raw truth in his voice. "Not since—" He stopped himself, chest heaving. "Not since when, Michael?" "Not since I was a kid." But the way he said it, the way his whole body had recoiled at Elias's name, told Jordan everything he needed to know. This wasn't the response of a killer protecting himself. This was the response of someone who'd seen something, someone who'd been carrying a horror for so long it had become part of his skeleton. Jordan softened his voice. "Michael, I don't think you killed Maya Ellison. I think you know who did." Tears began streaming down Michael's face, not delicate crying, the ugly, gasping kind that comes from pressure released after decades of building. His shoulders shook, his hands covered his face. "I was too afraid," he choked out. "I was just a kid. Elias said if I ever told anyone, he'd come back for me. He said nobody would believe me anyway because I was adopted, because I was broken, because—" The words dissolved into sobs. "Michael," Jordan's voice was gentle but firm, "where did you go the night Maya died?" Silence, just breathing and crying. "Your father sent you somewhere, didn't he? To do something, or to get someone?" Michael's head snapped up, eyes red and wild. "My father didn't send me. My father was trying to stop it. But Elias was stronger. Elias was always stronger. And when my father tried to intervene—" He stopped, horrified at what he'd almost revealed. But Jordan was already putting the pieces together. The two DNA sources at the scene, the pastor's involvement, Michael's terror of Elias. A picture was forming that made Jordan's stomach turn. "Michael, was your uncle Elias in Atlanta that night?" A tiny nod. "Did he kill Maya?" Another nod, smaller, like admitting it might summon the monster back into the room. "And your father witnessed it?" Michael's voice came out as barely a whisper. "My father tried to stop him. They fought. That's why both their blood was there. But Elias—" He looked up at Jordan with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "Elias always wins." Before Jordan could respond, Michael stood abruptly, chair clattering backward. "I can't do this. I can't. He'll know. He always knows. I have to—" He bolted for the door, yanked it open, and disappeared into the hallway before Jordan could stop him. Two agents stationed outside moved to follow, but Jordan held up a hand. "Let him go," Jordan said quietly. "He's not running from us." He was running from a ghost that turned out to be very much alive. Rain hammered against Jordan's apartment windows at 11:43 p.m. when the knock came, soft but insistent. The kind of knock that says, "I don't want to be here, but I have nowhere else to go." He'd been sitting in the dark, nursing bourbon he wasn't really drinking, replaying Michael Coleman's interrogation in his mind, the terror in those eyes, the way Michael had run like a man fleeing execution. Jordan opened the door, expecting FBI agents with updates. Instead, he found Maya Ellison. Maya's mother had aged in the particular way that grief ages people. Not gradually, but in sudden collapses. She'd been 43 when Maya died. Now 69, she looked simultaneously older and frozen in time, like part of her had stopped living the night her daughter's body was found. She wore a rain-soaked jacket and clutched something wrapped in plastic against her chest. "Mrs. Ellison," Jordan stepped aside. "Please, come in." She didn't move. "You need to see this. I should have given it to you 26 years ago. But Eugene, Pastor Coleman, he told me it would only cause more pain. He said Maya wouldn't want me reading her private thoughts. He said I should let her rest in peace." Her voice cracked. He convinced me to hide it. The thing wrapped in plastic was a book, small, leather-bound, with a brass lock that had been broken open. "Maya's diary," Lorraine whispered. "She wrote in it every day that last week. I found it under her mattress after she died. When I told the pastor I was going to give it to the FBI, he came to my house. He sat with me for 3 hours, holding my hand, telling me that some things were too private, too sacred. He said Maya's thoughts should stay Maya's thoughts, and I believed him." Tears mixed with rain on her face. I believed the man who killed her. Jordan's hands trembled as he took the diary. "Why now? Why tonight?" "Because I saw the news, the DNA match, Eugene's name, and I realized..." She couldn't finish. She just turned and walked back into the rain, leaving Jordan holding evidence that should have broken the case open in 1998. If you're feeling angry right now, angry at the manipulation, at the lost time, at how easily monsters disguise themselves as saviors, channel that anger into action. Subscribe, share this story. Comment about someone in your life who seemed trustworthy until they weren't, because the algorithm needs to know that people care about these truths. Every click is a vote that says victims like Maya deserve to be heard, even 26 years later. Don't just watch, participate in making sure her voice reaches as many people as possible. Jordan spent the next hour reading by lamplight, and with each page, the case he thought he understood revealed itself as something far more twisted. The first entries were ordinary: classes, friends, choir practice, a boy Maya had a crush on. Normal 19-year-old concerns. But then, dated June 7th, 1998, exactly 1 week before her death. "There's a man who keeps watching me after choir practice. Not old, but not young either. He stands across the street by the oak tree and just stares. Today, I walked toward him to ask what he wanted, and he smiled at me. Not a friendly smile, the kind that makes you want to run. When I got closer, he was gone, just vanished. It scared me more than if he'd still been there." June 9th. "Oh, he was there again tonight. This time he crossed the street when I came out. I thought about screaming, but there were people around, and I felt stupid. He walked right past me and whispered something I couldn't hear clearly. It sounded like you looked just like her. Who do I look like? I told Deacon Michael about it after practice. He got really pale and asked me to describe the man. When I did, he started shaking. He told me to never be alone anywhere, ever. He said his father needed to know." Jordan's pulse quickened. Michael had known. He'd tried to warn Maya. He'd told his father. And what had Pastor Eugene Coleman done with that information? June 11th. Pastor Coleman called me into his office today before rehearsal. He asked about the man I'd seen. I told him everything. He got very quiet, and then he said something that confused me. "Michael shouldn't have told you to worry me. This is a family matter." A family matter. What does that mean? Then he said the man was his brother Elias, that Elias had problems, a sickness, he called it, and that people wouldn't understand. He made me promise not to tell anyone, not even Mama. He said he would handle it. He said Elias would be gone by the weekend, and I'd never have to see him again. Jordan had to stop reading. His hands were shaking too hard. Eugene Coleman had known. He'd known his brother was stalking Maya. He'd known about Elias's sickness, a word that could mean anything from mental illness to something much darker. And instead of calling police, instead of protecting a 19-year-old girl, he tried to handle it quietly. How many cases had Jordan seen that followed this exact pattern? Family protecting family, secrets valued over safety. The institution, whether church, school, or business, protecting itself instead of its most vulnerable members. June 13th, 1 day before Maya died, Elias Coleman was at church today. Pastor introduced him to everyone as his brother visiting from out of state. He looks nothing like Pastor, rough, like he's lived outside, like he's been fighting his whole life. When we shook hands, he held mine too long. He said, "You're the one who's been asking questions about me." I told him I didn't know what he meant. He smiled that same horrible smile and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. She asked too many questions too. I wanted to run, but we were in the fellowship hall, surrounded by people. After he walked away, Michael grabbed my arm, actually grabbed it hard enough to hurt, and said, "Stay away from him, please. He's dangerous and my father won't admit it." I asked Michael what he meant, but he just kept saying, "Please, please stay away from him." The final entry was dated June 14th, 1998, the day Maya died. Written in the afternoon, hours before she'd walked to what she thought was a safe ride home. I saw them arguing in the parking lot this morning, Pastor Coleman and Elias yelling. Pastor was crying, actually crying, saying, "Not again, please God, not again." What did he mean, not again? Has Elias hurt someone before? I think I need to tell someone what's happening. But Pastor made me promise. And he's a man of God. He wouldn't protect someone dangerous, would he? I'm going to talk to Pastor after practice tonight. I'm going to tell him I'm scared and I need to understand what's happening. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe Elias is just strange and awkward and I'm being paranoid. Mama always says I have too much imagination. I'll write more tonight after I talk to Pastor. Everything will make sense then. There were no more entries. Maya never came home to write them. Jordan closed the diary and sat in darkness so complete he couldn't see his own hands, but he could see with horrible clarity what had happened that night. Maya had confronted Pastor Coleman. She'd asked the question she wasn't supposed to ask, and somehow, through warning or negligence or active participation, Eugene Coleman had delivered her into his brother's hands. The pastor hadn't just failed to protect Maya, he'd been part of the machinery that killed her. Jordan reached for his phone. Michael Coleman needed to see this diary, because whatever terror had kept him silent for 26 years, whatever threat Elias had held over him, it was time for the whole truth to come out, even if that truth destroyed everything left of the Coleman family name. The DNA report that landed on Jordan's desk at 6:47 a.m. shattered what he thought he knew about the Coleman family and about the night Maya Ellison died. Dr. Sarah Chen had run additional tests, pushed the analysis further than standard protocol required, and what she'd found made Jordan's coffee go cold in his hands before he'd taken a single sip. "You need to see this immediately," her email read. "The blood sample contains a revelation that changes everything. Call me." Jordan called. Dr. Chen answered on the first ring, her voice tight with the kind of tension that comes from discovering something you wish you hadn't. "I ran extended kinship analysis on both DNA contributors from the crime scene," she said without preamble. Standard procedure would have stopped at identifying familial matches, but something about the genetic markers seemed off. So I went deeper. And Jordan was already standing, pacing his office. The primary DNA contributor, the larger blood sample, matches Michael Coleman's paternal lineage, but it's not Michael's DNA. The age markers, the genetic methylation patterns, they indicate someone approximately 15 to 20 years older than Michael. Jordan's mind raced. Eugene Coleman, the pastor. That was my first thought too. But here's where it gets impossible. The DNA is definitely from the Coleman bloodline, but when I cross-referenced it against Eugene Coleman's medical records, his blood type from hospital documentation, his genetic markers from when he was tested as a potential kidney donor in 2003, she paused. "Jordan, Eugene Coleman is not biologically related to this blood sample. He can't be the source." The room tilted. "But you said it matches the Coleman family line." "It does, which means we're not looking at Eugene Coleman. We're looking at someone who shares DNA with both Eugene and Michael through a different connection. Someone else in the family tree." "Elias," Jordan breathed, "Eugene's brother." "Exactly. And here's what makes this a murder case instead of just a tragic cold case. There were two distinct blood sources at that crime scene. But they're not from two different people fighting. They're from two people who are genetically related. The secondary DNA sample, it's also from the Coleman bloodline, but it's older, much older, paternal generation older." Jordan stopped pacing. "You're telling me both Eugene and Elias Coleman's blood was at that scene?" "That's what the genetics indicate. Two brothers, both bleeding, both present when Maya Ellison died. Dr. Chen's voice dropped lower. But here's the twist that should terrify you. The distribution pattern of the blood suggests something I've never seen in a case before. The primary sample, Elias's blood, was scattered. Defensive wounds, splatter patterns consistent with a physical altercation. But Eugene's blood? It was pooled, stationary, like he was standing in one place, bleeding but not fighting. Before Jordan could process this, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Michael Coleman. Jordan put Dr. Chen on hold. Michael, where are you? I'm at my father's grave. Michael's voice sounded hollow, echoey. He was probably standing in the cemetery. I come here sometimes when I need to remember that he tried, that he wasn't entirely a monster. But Professor Hale, I lied to you. Not about Elias, but about my father's role that night. If you're putting together what Jordan's putting together, if you're realizing that this case involves layers of guilt that go beyond simple murder, then you need to stay with this story until the end. Hit subscribe because what Michael's about to reveal will change everything you think you understand about complicity, about family, about how far people will go to protect the ones they love. Drop a comment. At what point does silence become participation in a crime? Share this with someone who needs to understand. The truth is rarely as simple as guilty or innocent. Tell me everything, Jordan said quietly. All of it, no more protecting ghosts. Michael's breath shuddered through the phone. My father knew Elias was in Atlanta. Knew he'd been released from a psychiatric facility in Tennessee 2 weeks before Maya died. There was a girl in Chattanooga in 1994. She survived barely. No charges were filed because the family was paid off. My father paid them $30,000 from church funds. He told the board it was for mission work. Jordan's stomach turned. Your father covered up an assault. The dentist too. My father convinced himself it was an illness, that Elias needed treatment, not prison, that family protects family no matter what. That's what their father taught them. Coleman men take care of Coleman problems privately. Michael's voice broke. But when Elias showed up in Atlanta in '98, when he started following Maya, my father realized he'd made a mistake. That some problems can't be prayed away. Michael, was your father there when Maya was killed? Silence stretched so long, Jordan thought the call had dropped. Then yes, the word landed like a stone in dark water. My father called Elias to the church that night, told him to come talk, to leave town, that he couldn't be around Maya anymore. But Elias was already obsessed. He'd been watching her for weeks. He said Maya looked like a girl he'd known in Tennessee. Said she had the same eyes, the same way of walking, the same defiance. Michael was crying now. My father thought he could reason with him, thought he could be the big brother, the man of God, the voice of authority. He had no idea. What happened, Michael? Elias agreed to meet him at the rail yard. Neutral ground. My father went alone. But Maya, Michael's voice cracked completely. Maya saw them leave together from the church parking lot. She followed them because she wanted answers. Because she'd been writing in her diary about Elias, about being scared. And my father had told her everything was handled. She followed them to prove to herself she was safe. Jordan closed his eyes. She walked into her own murder. My father didn't know she was there until it was too late. Elias saw her first. And when she tried to run, Michael couldn't continue for a moment. My father tried to stop him, actually fought him. That's why both their blood was there. My father grabbed Elias, tried to pull him off Maya, and Elias stabbed him. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to make him let go. Enough to make him watch what happened next. And your father never called police. He called me. Michael's voice was barely audible. At 11:30 that night, told me to come to the rail yard. Told me to bring cleaning supplies and trash bags. I hoped, maybe someone was hurt but alive. Maybe I could help. But when I got there, you saw Maya's body. I saw my father kneeling next to her, covered in blood, crying. And I saw Elias washing his hands in a puddle like he'd just finished working on a car. He looked at me and said, "Tell anyone and you're next. Tell anyone and I'll make it look like your father did it." Who do you think they'll believe? A preacher or a damaged adopted kid? Jordan felt rage building in his chest. Your father let him walk away. My father was in shock. He kept saying, we have to call the police. But Elias said if we did, he'd tell them my father lured Maya there, that my father had been inappropriate with her and killed her when she threatened to tell. Elias said he knew how to make evidence disappear. He had contacts, people who owed him favors from prison. Michael's breathing was ragged. My father believed him, and more than that, my father couldn't face what he'd allowed to happen. Couldn't admit he'd enabled a monster for years. So he made a choice. He covered it up. He made Elias leave Atlanta that night, drove him to the bus station himself, gave him $5,000. Then he came back and moved. Maya's body to where it would be found quickly. He didn't want animals to get to her. He arranged her respectfully, tried to give her dignity in death since he'd failed to protect her life. Michael sobbed openly now. Then he took the blood sample from the crime lab himself. He had access because he was consulting with investigators, playing the concerned pastor. He hid it where he thought it would never be found and spent the rest of his life trying to atone for what he'd done. That's not atonement, Jordan said coldly. That's cowardice. I know, but he was my father, and I was 22 and terrified. And Elias was still out there, free. And I knew, if I ever told the truth, he'd come back. Jordan's next question came out hard. Where is Elias Coleman now? I don't know. I swear to God, I don't know. But Professor Hale, Michael's voice dropped to a whisper. He calls me. Every year on June 14th, Maya's death date. He never says anything. Just breathes into the phone for 30 seconds and hangs up. Just to remind me he's watching. That he hasn't forgotten. That Coleman men keep Coleman secrets. Jordan's blood ran ice cold. He called you this year. 3 weeks ago. Same number, always from different area codes. I have them all saved. Every single year for 26 years. Michael, I need those phone records now. I'm sending them to your email right now. But Professor Hale, there's something else. Something I've never told anyone. Michael's voice shook with a terror that transcended time. When Elias calls, sometimes I hear sounds in the background. Traffic, train announcements, airport noise. He's not hiding in one place. He's moving, constantly. And the last call I got 3 weeks ago, I heard a voice in the background announcing departures. To Atlanta. The line went dead. Jordan stared at his phone, then at the DNA report still glowing on his computer screen. Elias Coleman wasn't just alive. He was mobile. He was careful. And if Michael was right, he was coming back. The monster wasn't just in the shadows anymore. He was heading home. The manhunt for Elias Coleman began at dawn on May 15, 2024, with a coordination between 3 federal agencies and a revelation that made Jordan Hale understand just how badly they'd underestimated the monster they were chasing. Because when the FBI finally pulled Elias Coleman's full record, not just the sanitized version from '98, but the deep background that required interagency cooperation, they discovered that the man who killed Maya Ellison had never stopped hunting. Special Agent Marcus Webb spread the files across the conference table like a dealer showing a losing hand. Elias Coleman, age 64, born 1960 in Macon, Georgia. Dishonorable discharge from the Army in 1982 after assault allegations. Drifted between Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia for 4 decades. And here's what we missed. He tapped a thick folder. 7 unsolved cases across 4 states between 1994 and 2023, all young women, all found near transportation hubs, all sharing Maya Ellison's physical profile. Jordan felt sick. 7? That we can connect so far. Chattanooga, 94. Like Michael mentioned, that victim survived but was paid off. Birmingham, 1, Meridian. 07, Jackson, 12, Memphis. 16, Tuscaloosa. 19, and Savannah in 2023. Just 8 months ago. Webb pulled out photographs. Different faces. Same terror frozen in death. But here's what makes Elias particularly dangerous. He's not just mobile. He's methodical. He works as a long-haul truck driver. Has since 2001, perfect cover for a predator. Constantly moving between jurisdictions, never staying long enough to establish a pattern law enforcement could track. How did we miss this? Dr. Chen asked from the back of the room. Because he was careful. Different last names on his commercial driver's licenses. He used his mother's maiden name, Morrison for work, kept Coleman for personal documents. No criminal record because witnesses either didn't survive to testify or, like in Chattanooga, were paid into silence. And his brother, Webb's jaw tightened. His brother Eugene spent decades running interference, paying off families, moving Elias between states whenever things got too hot, acting as his protector and enabler right up until 2010 when Eugene finally died, probably from the guilt that was eating him alive. Jordan thought of Pastor Coleman's heart attack during a sermon. The man had literally died, preaching about redemption he'd never earned. "Where is Elias now?" Jordan asked. "That's the problem. His last known employment was with Dixie Star Transport out of Birmingham. He quit 3 months ago, told his dispatcher he was retiring. No forwarding address. His commercial license expired last month and he didn't renew. His bank account shows cash withdrawals from ATMs across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, but no pattern, no credit card usage. He's gone dark. Except for the phone calls to Michael," Jordan said. "We can trace those." Webb nodded. "We're working on it. But he's smart, uses prepaid cells, makes calls from public places with lots of background noise to disguise location. The call from 3 weeks ago, made from a rest stop outside Chattanooga. By the time we got agents there, he was long gone. But," Webb pulled out another document, "we caught a break. Traffic cameras at that rest stop captured a 2015 gray Ford F. 150 with Mississippi plates registered to a James Morrison. Same truck was spotted on I-85. South heading toward Atlanta 4 days ago. The room erupted in activity. Agents on phones, computers humming, APBs being issued. But Jordan sat frozen because he understood something the others hadn't grasped yet. If you're watching this and your heart is racing, if you're wondering how a man could evade justice for 30 years and whether they'll catch him before he kills again, then you need to see this through to the end. Subscribe right now, because what happens next proves that sometimes justice delayed is still justice earned. Comment and tell me, do you believe in redemption for people who've enabled evil? Share this with someone who thinks the system always fails, because you're about to see what happens when enough people refuse to let a victim be forgotten. "He's not running," Jordan said quietly. Everyone stopped and looked at him. "Elias isn't trying to evade capture. He's coming back to finish something." "What do you mean?" Webb asked. "Think about it. He's been free for 26 years. Could have disappeared into Mexico, Canada, anywhere. But he stayed in the South. Kept calling Michael every year on Maya's death anniversary. Even when it would have been safer to vanish completely, he maintained that connection. Why? Dr. Chen understood first. Because Michael is the only witness who can still testify, the only person who saw what really happened that night. Exactly. And now that the case has been reopened, now that DNA evidence has surfaced, Elias knows it's only a matter of time before Michael talks. He's probably been monitoring news coverage. He knows his brother is dead, so there's no protection anymore. He knows the blood sample was found. Jordan stood. He's not running from us. He's coming for Michael to eliminate the last loose end. Webb grabbed his phone. "We need protection on Michael Coleman immediately." "Already thought of that," Jordan said. "I called him an hour ago, told him to meet me at the FBI safe house on Piedmont. He should be—" His phone rang. Unknown number. Jordan's instinct screamed even before he answered. "Professor Hale." The voice was sandpaper over gravel, aged by cigarettes and meanness. "You've been looking for me. Well, here I am." The room went silent. Webb started tracing the call. "Elias Coleman," Jordan said. "The one and only. You found my blood. Clever. Eugene always said that sample would come back to haunt us. Guess the old bastard was right." A dark chuckle. "But here's the thing. You think finding evidence from 26 years ago scares me? I've been killing for 30 years. Maya was just the one that got complicated." Jordan's hand tightened on the phone. "Where's Michael?" "Now, why would I tell you that, although—" Another pause, the sound of traffic in the background. "I will say, your boy Michael is braver than I gave him credit for. When I grabbed him outside his apartment an hour ago, you know what he said? He said, Do it. I'm not afraid anymore. Maya deserves the truth even if I have to die for it. Got tears in my eyes. Really did. Jordan's blood turned to ice. If you hurt him... Oh, I'm not going to hurt him, Professor. I'm going to give him what he's wanted for 26 years. A chance to tell his story. See, I'm tired of running. Tired of looking over my shoulder. So here's what's going to happen. You want Michael alive? You want to hear his testimony? You come meet me, alone. No wires, no backup, no FBI cavalry. Just you and me and Michael having an honest conversation about what really happened to sweet little Maya. Where it all started. The rail yard, old switching station near Pine Ridge. You remember it, don't you? You stood in Maya's blood and promised her mother you'd find justice. Well, tonight you get your chance. The line started to break up. Come alone, Professor. You bring anyone else, Michael dies the same way Maya did. And I promise you, I've gotten much better at it over the years. Midnight. Don't be late. The call ended. Webb was already mobilizing teams, calling SWAT, coordinating tactical response. But Jordan knew what he had to do. Because Elias Coleman was right about one thing, Maya deserved the truth. And if the only way to get it was to walk into a trap, then that's exactly what Jordan would do. 26 years ago, he'd failed to save Maya Ellison. Tonight, he wouldn't fail to save Michael Coleman, even if it meant confronting the monster face to face. Alone in the darkness where evil had won once before, the rail yard waited. And so did justice, delayed, but finally within reach. The rail yard looked different in moonlight than it had under crime scene. Floodlights 26 years ago, but Jordan Hale's body remembered every detail. The way gravel crunched underfoot, the smell of creosote and rust, the particular silence that comes from abandoned places where something terrible happened. He wore no wire despite Webb's protests, carried no weapon despite every instinct screaming he should, because Elias Coleman had been hunting long enough to spot a trap, and Michael Coleman had been terrorized long, enough to deserve an honest chance at survival. Jordan reached the old switching station at 11:47 p.m. The structure was mostly collapsed now, just skeletal beams and corrugated metal panels that banged in the wind like distant applause. A single light glowed inside, a camping lantern sitting on an overturned crate, and beside it, tied to a support beam with rope that looked professional and efficient, sat Michael Coleman. He was alive, bruised, bleeding from a cut above his eye, but alive. His eyes met Jordan's with an expression that carried both gratitude and resignation, the look of someone who'd stopped expecting rescue years ago. Right on time. Elias Coleman stepped from the shadows, and Jordan finally saw the monster without the filter of old photographs or witness descriptions. At 64, Elias was lean and weathered, like something carved from driftwood, all sharp angles and hard edges. His eyes were the worst part, flat and cold. The eyes of someone who'd stopped seeing other people as human decades ago. He held a hunting knife, the blade catching lantern light. Punctual. I appreciate that in a man. Shows respect. Let Michael go, Jordan said. You wanted me here. I'm here. He's not part of this anymore. Elias smiled, and it was the smile Maya had described in her diary. Not friendly, but hungry. See? That's where you're wrong, Professor. Michael's been part of this since he was 7 years old, and my brother dragged him out of that foster home. Eugene thought adopting a broken kid would fix what was wrong with the Coleman family. Thought bringing in fresh blood would dilute the poison. He laughed. A sound like breaking glass. But poison doesn't dilute. It spreads. You're sick, Michael said, voice hoarse but steady. You were always sick, and Uncle Eugene spent his life pretending you weren't. Sick. Elias rolled the word around like he was tasting it. That's what Eugene called it. My sickness. Like I had a disease instead of a nature. Like praying harder would fix what God built into me from the start. He turned to Jordan. You want to know what really happened the night Maya died? The version that doesn't come from Michael's traumatized memories or Eugene's guilt-soaked confessions. Before you hear what happens next, before Elias Coleman tells his version of the truth, understand that this is why we fight to keep cold cases alive. This is why Maya's name still matters 26 years later. Hit subscribe because justice doesn't have an expiration date, and evil only wins when we stop paying attention. Comment below, have you ever had to face a truth you weren't ready for? Share this because someone in your life needs to know that even the darkest stories can end in light. I came to Atlanta because Eugene begged me to, Elias continued, circling Jordan slowly like a predator testing prey. Said he had a good life here, good church, good reputation. Wanted me to see that the Coleman name could mean something respectable. But respect is just another word for pretending, Professor. And I got tired of pretending a long time ago. You started stalking Maya, Jordan said, keeping his voice level. I started appreciating her. There's a difference. She reminded me of a girl I knew in Tennessee. Same fire. Same way of tilting her head when she didn't believe what you were saying. Same mistake of thinking she was safe. Because she was smart, Elias. Stopped circling. Eugene found out I was watching her. Threatened to turn me in if I didn't leave. So I agreed to meet him here, to talk it out, to let him play Big Brother one more time. But Maya, his voice took on something almost like respect. Maya followed us, hid behind that pile of railroad ties over there, and listened to everything. Heard me tell Eugene about the girl in Tennessee. Heard me admit what I'd done. And when she stood up to run, to go tell the police everything she'd heard, I couldn't let that happen. Michael was crying silently, tears running down his face. This was the moment he'd run from for 26 years. The moment his uncle confirmed every nightmare. Eugene tried to stop me, Elias said. Actually fought me. First time in our lives my preacher brother threw a punch. Caught me in the ribs, made me drop the knife. That's when I grabbed the tire iron instead. Eugene jumped between me and Maya, tried to shield her with his own body. That's how he got cut. I slashed him across the arm, trying to get to her. His blood went everywhere. Mine too, from where he'd punched me in the mouth. All that Coleman blood mixing together in the dirt. But you got past him, Jordan said quietly. I'm faster. Always was. Eugene was too busy being righteous, being moral, being the good brother. All that goodness made him slow. Elias's eyes went distant, remembering. Maya tried to run, made it about 20 feet before I caught her. And Professor, I want you to understand something in that moment. When I had my hands around her throat, Eugene was begging, actually on his knees begging me to stop, promising me anything, money, protection, a fresh start somewhere else, begging God to intervene. And God didn't, Michael whispered. God never does. That's the secret Eugene spent his whole life refusing to accept. There's no divine intervention. There's just what we choose to do and what we choose to live with after. Elias turned back to Jordan. Eugene chose to let his brother walk away, chose to cover it up, chose to spend the rest of his pathetic life playing the grief-stricken pastor while protecting the man who killed one of his congregants. So tell me, Professor, who's the real monster? The man who acts on his nature, or the man who enables it? You both are, Jordan said. But Eugene's dead. You're not. And tonight that ends. Elias raised the knife. You think you can stop me? You came here alone, unarmed, noble but stupid. I came here alone because Michael deserved to hear the truth without tactical teams drowning it out. I came here unarmed because we needed your confession on record. Jordan pulled out his phone from his pocket, held it up. The screen glowed with an active call to Special Agent Webb. Every word you've said for the last 5 minutes has been transmitted to the FBI. They're 2 minutes out. You can run or you can finally stop running. For the first time, Elias Coleman looked uncertain. The knife trembled slightly in his hand. Then his face hardened into something ancient and terrible. If I'm going down, I'm taking Michael with me. He lunged toward Michael, but Jordan was already moving. 26 years of waiting, of failure, of nightmares about Maya Ellison transformed into pure action. Jordan intercepted Elias mid-stride, crashed into him with enough force to send them both sprawling. The knife skittered across gravel. They fought in the dirt where Maya had died. Two men separated by morality, but connected by obsession with the same case. Elias was stronger than he looked, all wiry muscle and survival instinct. He got his hands around Jordan's throat, squeezed. Jordan's vision darkened. He thought of Maya, of Maya Ellison, of 26 years of failure. Then he thought, not tonight. Jordan grabbed a railroad spike lying in the dirt and swung it into Elias's shoulder. The grip on his throat released. Elias howled, staggered back, and suddenly the rail yard was flooded with light. FBI vehicles, SWAT teams, the cavalry. Jordan had promised wouldn't come, but had positioned just far enough away to not trigger Elias's paranoia. Elias looked at the lights, at the agents pouring through the fence, at Jordan getting to his feet, and something in his expression changed. Not fear, but resignation. The look of someone who'd been running so long that part of him was relieved to finally stop. "I could tell you I'm sorry," Elias said as agents surrounded him, weapons drawn. "But Coleman men don't lie, not about what we are." They took him down hard, professional and efficient, read him his rights while he smiled that terrible smile, led him away in handcuffs while news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting live footage of the monster who'd haunted Atlanta for 26 years, finally in custody. Jordan cut Michael's ropes with the same hunting knife Elias had dropped. Michael collapsed into his arms, sobbing the kind of sobs that come from decades of captivity finally ending. "She deserved better," Michael choked out. "Maya deserved so much better. She deserved justice," Jordan said, "and now, finally, she has it." 3 months later, Jordan stood in a packed courtroom as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Maya Ellison's murder, plus 6 other cases across 4 states where DNA and Elias's confession connected him to unsolved deaths. No possibility of parole. The rest of his life in a cage that would never be small enough for what he'd done. Michael Coleman testified for 4 hours, his voice never wavering, finally speaking the truth he'd carried for 26 years. The jury listened with tears in their eyes. The judge called him the bravest witness she'd ever seen. Maya Ellison attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row with Maya's photograph in her lap. When the verdict was announced, she didn't cheer or celebrate. She just closed her eyes and whispered something that might have been prayer or might have been relief. After the trial, Jordan visited Maya's grave. Someone, probably Lorraine, had placed fresh flowers. The headstone read, "Maya Ellison, 1978-1998, beloved daughter, forever young, forever remembered." Jordan knelt in the grass. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said to the stone, to the memory, to the girl who'd written warnings in her diary that nobody had read until it was too late. "But we got him. We got them both. Eugene with his guilt and his grave. Elias with his evil and his cage. You can rest now." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. Jordan chose to believe. It sounded like forgiveness. Because some treasures aren't buried in the ground, they're buried in the hearts of people who refuse to give up. Justice delayed is still justice. Truth postponed is still truth. And victims forgotten by headlines are never forgotten by the ones who loved them. Maya Ellison's case was closed, but her name would live forever, not as a tragedy, but as a testament to the reality that darkness, no matter how long it hides, eventually meets the light. And all because of one dusty, lost blood sample that refused to stay silent.
If this story moved you, if Maya's name now means something to you that it didn't an hour ago, then subscribe, share, and comment. Because the algorithm doesn't elevate stories that matter. People do. You do. Every click is a vote that victims' names deserve to be spoken, that cold cases deserve warm hearts, that justice, no matter how long delayed, is always worth fighting for. Some truths live forever in the soul. Let Maya's truth live in yours.